The card in my hand said Table 7, and Brad was already laughing before I could read the name printed beneath it. Oh man. He leaned over my shoulder, drink sloshing. They paired you with her. I looked across the room. Table 7 was near the back wall, slightly removed from the cluster of white tablecloths and nervous laughter that made up the main floor. A woman sat there alone, not checking her phone like everyone else was doing, not smoothing her dress or scanning the door. She was reading the dessert menu like it had personally offended her, and she was deciding whether to give it a second chance. Brad clapped me on the shoulder. The kind of clap that says better you than me. 40-something probably. No offense to her, but... He laughed again, easy and careless. You should ask the organizer to reshuffle. I know the guy. I looked at the card. I looked at Table 7. I walked toward it. What happened next, nobody in that room expected. Including me. My name is Sebastian Xavier. I'm 34 years old, and I am, depending on who you ask, either boringly stable or quietly extraordinary. The people who know me well enough to have an opinion on that question are very few, which suits me fine. I manage operations for a mid-size freight and logistics company called Harman & Cross. My official title is Regional Operations Coordinator, which means I am the person who makes sure that when a shipping container leaves a warehouse in Columbus, it actually arrives in Denver on the day someone was promised it would. I troubleshoot. I plan 18 steps ahead. I am very good at identifying the moment when a system is about to fail and intervening before anyone else has noticed the problem. This skill, it turns out, does not transfer cleanly into the area of personal relationships. My ex-wife's name was Dana. We were together for 6 years, married for 2 of them, and the divorce was not catastrophic, just quiet. The kind of quiet that's worse in some ways because there's no wreckage to point at. We just ran out of the particular kind of energy it takes to keep choosing each other. She's remarried now, somewhere in Portland, and I genuinely hope she's happy. I mean that. I've turned it over enough times that I'm sure I mean it. That was 3 years ago. Since then I have gotten a slightly better apartment, adopted a coffee routine that borders on ritual, and become the kind of man who spends Saturday afternoons at the farmer's market not because I have someone to buy flowers for but because the walk clears my head and the kettle corn is legitimately excellent. Not lonely. Just settled. Not broken because I had rebuilt, carefully, deliberately, one undramatic piece at a time, into something that felt more like myself than the version of me that existed inside that marriage. I was not unhappy. I was still. The way a lake is still in October. Nothing wrong with it. Just waiting for the particular kind of wind that would change the surface of things. Brad Kowalski is my coworker and the closest thing I have to a best friend by proximity rather than intent. He dragged me to this singles mixer at a downtown hotel with the particular energy of someone doing you a favor you didn't request. He meant well. Most people who mean well are dangerous in exactly this way, fully convinced that what you need is whatever they've decided you need. I'd agreed to come because it was a Wednesday, I had no plans, and sometimes the simplest reason is the true one. I did not expect anything to happen at this mixer. I was wrong. The hotel was called the Meridian, and whoever had decorated the ballroom for this event had committed fully to the idea that romance could be conjured with string lights and white tablecloths. To their credit, it almost worked. The light was warm, the kind that flattens everything slightly and makes everyone look like they're being remembered rather than seen. There was a bar along the left wall doing serious business, and a jazz quartet in the corner playing the kind of music that functions as ambient noise for people who need something to not listen to while they figure out whether they like each other. The room smelled like someone's good perfume competing with someone else's cologne, and underneath both of those, the particular clean linen smell of hotel spaces that have been used for celebrations and have absorbed some faint residue of everyone who ever hoped something good would happen in them. There were maybe 60 people. Split roughly even, name tags with first names only, the event's attempt at intimacy, and a card system where the organizers had done the pairings in advance based on the profiles everyone submitted online. It was, Brad had explained on the way over, scientifically matched. I did not ask what science. Table 7 was slightly apart from the central cluster. Whether this was deliberate or incidental I couldn't tell. It had a small vase with a single yellow tulip that had begun to list sideways, ignored by whoever was responsible for the arrangements. She was already there when I crossed the room. And the first thing I noticed, the very first thing before anything else registered, was how she was sitting. Not performing. That's the only way I can put it. Every other person in that room was performing in some direction. Performing casual, performing interested, performing relaxed, performing available. She was not. She had the dessert menu propped against the tulip vase and she was reading it with genuine critical engagement, her chin resting on her hand, one finger tapping the corner of the laminated card in a slow rhythm. She glanced up when I was 2 tables away, clocked me, looked back at the menu. Not rude. Just, she'd seen me, filed me, and was not going to perform interest until there was something to be interested in. Fair enough. Then I was at the table and she looked up again and I got the specific details. She was somewhere north of 40, I would later learn 43, and she'd deliver that information with the flat, faintly challenging tone of someone who has decided to stop softening that number for anyone's comfort. Her hair was dark with a thread of silver at both temples that she hadn't bothered to color, cut straight across her jaw. Her eyes were a green-gray, sharper than the rest of her face, like exhaustion had not managed to dull the part of her that still noticed everything. Fine lines at the corners of her eyes that deepened when she was amused and went flat when she was not. She was wearing a dress the color of red wine, neither formal nor casual, the kind of thing a woman wears when she's going somewhere she's not entirely sure was worth getting dressed for. She set down the dessert menu. Your table 7. According to the card. I showed it. She showed me hers. Claire Navarro. Sebastian Xavier. Are you going to sit down, Sebastian Xavier, or are you still deciding whether this was a mistake? I sat down. Here is the specific thing about Claire that I would come to understand only in pieces over weeks. She had a theory. Not a general worldview but an actual theory which she had formulated and could defend, about why used bookstores are better organized than new ones. The argument, which I would eventually hear in full, had to do with the way readers sort their discards, which reveals more about a book's character than any algorithm. She would tell me, argued this at length with every bookseller who would engage her, and at least 3 who had asked her to leave. She talked to books the way some people talk to difficult relatives, a mixture of affection, exasperation, and the sense that the relationship predates any particular argument and will outlast it. But I didn't know any of that yet. I just knew she told me to sit down and I had, and she'd already picked up the dessert menu again. The crème brûlée, she said without looking up, is clearly the only defensible choice. Everything else is hedging. I looked at the menu. What about the chocolate lava cake? She looked at me over the top of the laminated card. A lava cake is just a brownie that didn't finish. That landed. The mixer had a structure. I'll give the organizers credit for that. They'd put some thought into preventing the specific social agony of 2 people sitting across from each other with nothing to do but excavate a personality. There were prompts on small cards at each table, conversation starters disguised as games, and after 45 minutes, a brief group interlude where everyone rotated and introduced their paired partner to the room. That last part was where it went sideways. The organizer, a cheerful man named Phil who had the energy of someone who had trained himself to be cheerful as a professional requirement, worked the microphone around the room. Each couple stood, said their names, said one thing about their partner they'd learned in the last 45 minutes. Charming in theory. Brad was 3 tables over, paired with a woman his age who was currently laughing at everything he said. He caught my eye across the room and gave me the kind of look that said, "See, this is why you come to these things." Then he glanced at Claire and his expression did something complicated. When Phil got to our table he handed the microphone to me first. "Sebastian Xavier," I said. "And this is Claire Navarro. Something I learned about her in the last 45 minutes. She has a fully developed theory about the organizational superiority of used bookstores over new ones, and I'm approximately 60% convinced she's right." Mild, appreciative laughter from the room. Claire did not perform modesty. She inclined her head slightly, the way you acknowledge a point fairly made. Phil moved the mic toward her. She took it with the particular grip of someone who has held a microphone before and is not intimidated by it. "This is Sebastian Xavier," she said, "and something I learned about him. He is the kind of person who notices when a flower vase is crooked and straightens it without mentioning it. Which is either very thoughtful or evidence of a significant control issue, and I haven't decided which yet." I had, in fact, quietly straightened the tulip about 20 minutes in. I had not thought she'd noticed. Laughter from the room again. Warmer this time. Then Phil moved on, and the group moment began to dissolve back into table conversations, and that's when Brad materialized at my elbow. He had the relaxed, roaming energy of someone who'd had 2 drinks and felt the evening was going well enough to start editorializing. He leaned toward me, angled so Claire could plausibly not hear, but not actually bothering to lower his volume. "Look," he said. "I'm just saying. Before the end of the night, I can get Phil to reshuffle the cards. It's not a big deal. There's a woman at table 3, you'd be into her, she's closer to your age, she works in." "Brad." My voice came out flat and quiet. He stopped. "I'm good where I am," I said. Not "she's great" or "don't be like that" or any version of managing his feelings about it. Just, "I'm good where I am." The kind of sentence that ends a conversation without requiring a fight. Brad blinked. Looked at Claire. Looked at me. Then he made a face that was trying to be neutral and not succeeding, and he said, "Sure, man," and drifted back toward his table. I turned back to Claire. She had heard. She was looking at her water glass. After a moment she said, "You didn't have to do that." "I know." He wasn't entirely wrong in terms of the conventional assessment of the situation. I thought about that for a second. The conventional assessment of what situation? She looked up. The situation where the organizers paired a 34-year-old with a 43-year-old single mother who spent the first 20 minutes of this mixer reading the dessert menu, and the 34-year-old's friend is now very diplomatically suggesting he cut his losses. The way she said it was not self-pity. It was just precise. She'd laid it out the way you lay out a document before a meeting. "Here are the facts, let's not pretend otherwise." I said, "The organizers matched us. That means at some point we both answered questions and some algorithm looked at our answers and thought, 'These two.'" I paused. "I'm going to go ahead and trust the algorithm." Silence. The kind that lasted 1 beat longer than silence usually does. Her hand was resting on the table. It tightened just slightly, just for a moment, around the water glass. She picked up the dessert menu again. "I'm ordering the crème brûlée," she said. "Do you want to split something?" Something had shifted. I didn't name it. I picked up the menu and said, "I'm getting the lava cake." "A brownie that didn't finish," she said without looking up. "Maybe I like unfinished things." She went very still. Then, "Careful, Sebastian Xavier." I was already not being careful. I just didn't know it yet. We stayed at table 7 for 2 hours after the event officially ended. This is not something I planned. Phil had given the closing remarks, the jazz quartet had shifted to something that signaled the end of things, and people had begun moving in the direction of the bar or the exit. Brad stopped by to say he was heading to an after-party. He said this in the particular cheerful way of someone who expects you to come with them, and then recalibrates in real time when they see you are not going to. He looked between me and Claire. He said, "Okay man, text me," and left, which was the right call and I think he knew it. Claire and I had not moved. At some point a waiter took our dessert plates, and another one brought coffee without being asked, because we were the last table with people at it and he was either very perceptive or very tired of waiting. The conversation had shifted into something I can only describe as a mutual excavation. Not questions and answers. Nothing that deliberate. More like two people walking through the same space from opposite directions, occasionally illuminating something the other hadn't been able to see from their angle. She told me about her daughter first, matter-of-factly. Her name is Rosie. She's 9. She has very strong opinions about which cereals are morally acceptable and she is currently writing what she describes as a novel, though I suspect it is primarily a list of grievances about her former hamster. What happened to the hamster? His name was Gerald. He died of, according to Rosie, old age and bad luck. He was 2.5. Pause. She gave him a state funeral. There was a speech. That's either a future novelist or a future lawyer. She tells me she's going to be a paleontologist, but she's also told me she's going to be a marine biologist, a national park ranger, and she checked something internal, a professional dinosaur finder, which she assures me is a real job. It's adjacent to paleontologist. She would appreciate that distinction. The thing about how she talked about Rosie, no apology in it. Some people, when they mention a child in a dating context, do it with a kind of preemptive defensiveness, like they're waiting to be told it's a deal breaker. Claire just talked about her daughter the way you talk about something true and central to your life, matter-of-factly, with affection that didn't perform itself. I said, "She sounds like someone worth knowing." Claire looked at me for a moment. Not measuring exactly. More like, noting. Filing it somewhere. What about you? She said. Any state funerals in your past? Only professional ones. I told her about Harmon and Cross, about the particular satisfaction of making something complicated run smoothly, about the way a well-executed logistics plan has a kind of elegance to it. I was aware as I said this, that it was not the most romantic description of a career, and I braced for the polite nod that people give when they've decided you're boring. She didn't nod politely. She said, "That's the thing nobody talks about with systems. When they work, they're invisible. You only notice the planner when something fails." I looked at her. Yes. Exactly. So, you're doing your job perfectly and being thanked by nobody constantly. More or less. That, she said, sounds genuinely maddening. It is. A beat. I love it. She smiled at that, not a polite smile, a real one, brief and warm and landing before she had time to moderate it. The first escalation happened around the second cup of coffee. We had arrived, somehow, at the topic of second chances, not the relationship kind, just in general. Second chances at things, jobs, cities, versions of yourself. I don't remember exactly how we got there. These things spiral. She said, I moved back to Columbus 2 years ago. I'd been in Chicago for 6 years, that's where Rosie was born, where I was married, where I got divorced. She said the last 2 things with no particular weight, just facts. Coming back felt like admitting something. Like what? She considered. Like admitting that the version of me who left, who thought Columbus was too small and too ordinary, was wrong. Or not wrong, but had been mistaken about what small and ordinary actually meant. What does it mean? She turned her coffee cup in both hands. I think I confused familiar with limiting. And they're not the same thing. I thought about that for longer than the conversation required. She noticed. Where did you go? I was married here, I said. Stayed when it ended. Everyone thought that was strange, that I didn't leave, start over somewhere. Why didn't you? Because running away from a place is different from going toward one. I hadn't found anything to go toward yet, so I stayed. Silence. The waiter appeared, gestured vaguely at the coffee pot. We both held out our cups. When he left, Claire said, That's one of the more honest things I've heard someone say about a divorce. I have a low tolerance for performing the narrative. The fresh start, new city thing never made sense to me as a solution. What does make sense to you as a solution? Something in my chest shifted. Staying in the same place long enough for it to become yours again, I said. Or for the first time, actually. She looked at me for a moment, that green-gray gaze doing the thing where it just landed. Careful, Sebastian Xavier, she said again. It was the same phrase. But the second time it meant something different. The second escalation happened 2 weeks later. She'd agreed to coffee, just coffee, not a date, she was specific about this, at a place called Foundry on the east side, which she'd chosen because it had a wall of used books that customers could take or leave and she liked to inspect its current inventory. This was, I would learn how she chose most of her non-essential destinations, by whether they had used books nearby. I arrived first. She arrived in a coat the color of autumn leaves, with a tote bag over one shoulder that appeared to contain at least 4 books and no visible regret about this. She sat down, pulled off her gloves and said, I reorganized the wall. I'm sorry? There were 2 copies of Anna Karenina in the R section. Both under R. One of them was clearly a Tolstoy, so she stopped. You're looking at me like that. I'm not looking at you like anything. You're trying not to smile. I'm succeeding. Barely, she said. The coffee came. She wrapped both hands around the cup the same way she had at the hotel. This was, I would realize, her default posture with a hot drink. Both hands like it might leave if she didn't hold it. We talked for 2 hours. I learned. She worked as an acquisitions coordinator for the city's public library system. She had a dog named Henry who was old, slow, deeply opinionated about where he slept, and who had, at some point in his life, developed an inexplicable fear of ceiling fans. She had grown up in Columbus, left for college, left further for Chicago, returned and was still in the process of deciding how she felt about that. She read approximately 3 books a week, which she insisted was normal and refused to explain what she meant by normal. She did not enjoy phone calls. She preferred to be told things directly and found roundabout honesty more exhausting than the honest version. I learned all of this through the particular sideways method of learning things about a person who is not performing their biography for you, through the asides, the parenthetical mentions, the way she talked about one thing and revealed something else. At one point she said, apropos of something about Rosie's school, "You know, most people at this point would ask why I was at a singles mixer at all, given the logistics." The logistics being Rosie. And the age thing. And the dog. And, a gesture that encompassed her general situation. "I wasn't going to ask," I said. "Why not?" "Because the answer seems obvious." She raised an eyebrow. "Enlighten me." "Because you're a person who hasn't stopped wanting things just because wanting them got complicated." Pause. "Same reason I was there." She went very still. Then she said lightly, "Henry is afraid of ceiling fans, not compliments. You can use them on him directly." I laughed. It came out surprised, which surprised me further. "There it is," she said. "I was starting to think you didn't do that." "Do what?" "Laugh like you actually mean it." The thing was, she said it gently. Not as an accusation. More like something she'd been quietly wondering and had decided just now to say out loud. I didn't have an answer for that one. I just looked at my coffee. That hit harder than I was ready for. The third escalation happened on a Sunday afternoon, 6 weeks after the mixer. We had arrived, without formally deciding to, at a pattern of Sundays. She had Rosie on weekdays and alternating Saturdays. Sundays were available. I had started to organize my Sundays around them, which I noticed but did not examine too closely. We were at her kitchen table, which was the kind of kitchen table that accumulates the evidence of a real life. Rosie's drawings pinned to the corkboard above it, a stack of library intake forms, a coffee mug with the words "Please. Just No" printed on it, 3 overdue notices for books she'd borrowed from another library branch and not yet returned, which she found ethically complicated given her job. Henry was under the table. He had his chin on my shoe, which he'd been doing since the third Sunday and which I had, at some point, started to take slightly personally. She was reading something, an intake form, scanning it with a pen, and I was pretending to read a book I'd borrowed from her wall of discards. The book was about the migratory patterns of birds and I retained nothing I'd read because I kept looking up. At some point she set down the pen and said without looking up, "You're not actually reading that. I'm reading it selectively. You've been on page 47 for 22 minutes. I like this page." She looked up. Something in the way she was looking at me, that green-gray attention, made me hold very still. She said, "Sebastian." "Yeah." "What are we doing?" The kitchen was quiet. Henry shifted slightly against my shoe. I said, "Spending Sunday." She tilted her head. "Just barely." "That's one answer. It's an accurate answer. It's a safe answer." My hand tightened around the spine of the bird book. I said, "Some things don't need to be named right away." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with the particular gentleness she used when she was being more honest than the conversation had asked for, "I agree. But I've also learned that when you wait too long to name something, it starts to name itself. And the name it picks is not always the right one." I didn't say anything. This was not because I had nothing to say. This was because everything I could have said felt either too small or too large for the room. She seemed to understand this because she didn't push. She picked up the pen again. Henry, under the table, exhaled a long, mournful breath, the way he did when he wanted someone to acknowledge that he was present and philosophical. "He's making a point," she said. "Henry agrees with you?" "Henry always agrees with me. He's very wise." She didn't look up from the form. "And he likes you, which is notable because he has never liked any person I've invited into this house without a very long evaluation period." My hand was still tied around the book. "Claire?" I said. "Sebastian," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." She paused in her writing. Just for a breath. Then she kept writing, but her shoulders had shifted, something had gone out of them, some braced quality I hadn't noticed until it was gone. "Good," she said quietly. "That's good." The third near confession sat in the room like a third person, and none of us named it. Henry exhaled again. She told him he was very wise. I turned to page 48 and this time I actually read it. It was a Tuesday, not a Sunday, which is the specific detail that makes me believe neither of us planned it. She texted me to say that Rosie was with her ex-husband for the week, that Henry had done something dignified and idiotic involving the neighbor's yard, and that she had made an excessive soup and did not want to eat it alone. I came over. The soup was good. Henry had recovered. The ceiling fan was off, which was courtesy. After dinner she washed dishes and I dried them. We had arrived at this division without discussing it, somewhere around the fourth Sunday, and it had just continued, and at some point the music she'd put on shifted from something upbeat to something quiet and piano-heavy, and the kitchen got slower. She handed me a bowl to dry. I dried it. She handed me another one. She said, without preamble, "My ex-husband used to say I was hard to be close to." I waited. He said I was too self-contained. That I didn't let people in. That loving me was like... She paused, her hands still in the water. He had a metaphor. I don't remember it exactly. Something about a house with all the lights on but the door locked. I set down the bowl. Carefully. She said, still not looking at me, "I thought about that for a long time. Whether he was right. And I think he was partially right, but about an earlier version of me. Not the current one." What changed? She was quiet for a moment. Then she turned, leaned against the counter, looked at me directly with that green-gray attention that didn't soften things, didn't flinch. "Rosie," she said. "Rosie changed it first. When you have a kid, the door comes open. Not all the way, but it opens." Pause. "And then?" She stopped. I said very carefully, "And then?" She looked at me for a long level moment. "You kept coming back on Sundays," she said. "That's all. You just kept coming back. And I didn't lock the door." I set down the dish towel. My hand was not entirely steady. She said quieter, "I'm not good at this part." "Which part?" "The part where I tell someone what they mean to me before I know what they're going to do with it." The kitchen was absolutely still. I said, "I keep coming back because I'm better in this kitchen than I am anywhere else on a Sunday." She went very still. "That's not a small thing," I said. "For me. That's not a small thing." She looked at the dish towel in my hand. Then at my face. Then she pressed her lips together briefly and looked away, and when she looked back her eyes were bright in a way she was keeping contained. She said quietly, "Okay. Just that. Okay." But the way she said it. The weight she put in it. Henry chose this exact moment to walk into the kitchen, look directly at the ceiling fan and bark once, sharp, startled, at the completely motionless ceiling fan. "Henry," she said, her voice catching slightly on a laugh. "It's off." He looked at her. He looked at the fan. He walked back out with tremendous dignity. She laughed, actually laughed, the kind you can't moderate, and I laughed too, and for a moment the kitchen was just the sound of that, which was enough. More than enough. What happened next didn't happen in a single scene. It happened the way most real things happen. In pieces, sideways, assembled only in retrospect. She started leaving her coat on the hook by my door. Not asking, not making a point of it, it just appeared there one Sunday and stayed. I did not mention it. I started keeping the specific coffee she liked, which was a slightly complicated order involving oat milk that I had never purchased before her, and I bought it without announcing the shift in my grocery habits. She brought Rosie to my apartment for the first time on a Saturday afternoon, presenting this casually, as though it were not a decision that had any particular weight. Rosie was 9, with her mother's gray-green eyes and her own entirely distinct energy, the kind of child who enters a room and immediately takes inventory of its interesting features, and then if she likes you tells you what she's found. She found a photograph of my grandmother's kitchen, a collection of rocks I'd had since childhood arranged on a windowsill, and a very old copy of the Phantom Toll Booth on my shelf, which she pulled out and held up and said, "This is one of the good ones." "I know," I said. She looked at me reassessing. "Mom said you were nice." She uses nice when she means something better than nice but doesn't want to say it. Claire from the kitchen doorway, "Rosie." "What?" "It's true." She put the book back with care. Then, "Can I look at the rocks?" She could look at the rocks. She named 4 of them before I could explain where they were from, and the names she gave them were better than their geological classifications. Weeks folded into each other. I drove Rosie to school twice when Claire had an early meeting, and Rosie informed me, with the confidence of someone who has done significant research, that she had decided I was, and I quote, "pretty okay for an adult." I told her this was the highest compliment I'd received in years. She said that was sad. I agreed. Brad asked me once at work how it was going, the careful phrasing of someone who knows they made a misstep and hasn't fully located the apology yet. "Good," I said. He nodded. Waited. "Really good," I said. Which was not something I said often, and he knew it. He nodded again, differently this time. The moment of yes happened in the parking lot of a grocery store on a Thursday evening, which is as unglamorous as it sounds and exactly right. We had, without planning it, ended up shopping at the same time. She was getting things for dinner, I was getting things for dinner, and we ran into each other in the produce section and continued from there, which is the sort of thing that begins to happen when two people have been circling each other long enough that the circles have begun to overlap. In the parking lot, under the orange fizz of the overhead lights, with two separate bags of groceries and Henry waiting at her house and Rosie waiting at mine, she stopped at the cart return and turned to me. "Sebastian," she said. "Yeah. I want to stop treating this like it might end." I looked at her. I keep hedging," she said. "In my head. I keep thinking, but this might not, and then I catch myself and I think, what am I doing? What am I protecting?" She put the cart away. "I don't want to protect myself from this anymore." The parking lot was quiet. Someone distantly was unloading a car. I said, "Good." She looked at me, waiting for more and also somehow knowing that good was the whole answer, and that I meant it absolutely. "Good?" she repeated. "I've been not hedging for a while," I said. "It's better over here." The corner of her mouth moved. Then she stepped forward and I stepped forward, and the parking lot folded around us like it had been waiting for us to stop being careful. We stood there for a long moment, her forehead against my jaw, the grocery bags at our feet, and neither of us said anything because there was nothing left that needed saying. 1 year. Rosie's birthday party had a dinosaur theme, which she had requested with the specificity of someone who has done significant academic preparation for this moment. I built the cake, 3 layers, fondant triceratops on top that required 4 attempts before Rosie pronounced them acceptable. When she did, she said in the tone of a small, serious art director, "These are very dignified dinosaurs." I told her that was the goal. She said, "Yeah." This was high praise and we both knew it. Claire, watching from the kitchen doorway with her coffee in both hands, said nothing. She just looked at me. I looked back. 2 years. Henry died on a November morning, peacefully in his bed, which we had moved to the living room so he was in the center of things for his last weeks. He died with his chin on Claire's knee and his feet touching my leg, which I have replayed more times than I can count. She cried. I held her for a long time. At some point she said quietly, "He liked you from the very first Sunday. He was smarter than either of us." "He was the wisest of us," I said. She pressed her face against my shoulder. We stayed like that until the morning shifted. Rosie drew a portrait of Henry the following week in careful pencil and presented it framed. It hangs in our hallway. In the portrait, Henry is looking directly at something off-frame, with an expression that is somehow, despite being a child's pencil drawing, genuinely dignified. 3 years. We were at a used bookstore, not Foundry, a different one in the short north, which Claire had rated acceptable based on her proprietary system, when I found it on a shelf in the back. A copy of the Phantom Tollbooth, same edition as mine in slightly worse condition. I turned it over in my hands. She appeared at my elbow the way she did without announcement. Looked at the book. Looked at me. I said, "I have something to ask you." "You have a lot to ask me," she said. "You're very restrained about the asking. This one's specific." She turned to face me fully. The store was quiet, a Tuesday afternoon, just us and a bored employee somewhere near the front. "Claire Navarro," I said. "You have a theory about used bookstores that is, at this point, completely proven. You named a dog Henry and he was the best person in most rooms. Your daughter thinks dinosaurs are dignified and she's right. You talk to difficult books like difficult relatives and you're kinder to both than they deserve." I held the paperback in both hands. "You didn't lock the door. And I have not once wanted to leave." She was very still. "I'm not good at grand gestures," I said. "I know," she said. "So, just, yes or no. Will you marry me?" Pause. "You brought me to a bookstore," she said. "You chose the bookstore. As a date, not a—" She stopped. Her eyes were bright, that contained brightness I had learned to read. "You're serious?" "Entirely. You don't have a ring." "I have a theory," I said, "that you'd rather choose the ring than receive one. Am I wrong?" She made a sound that was almost a laugh. "Almost." "No," she said. "Which no?" "The no that means yes," she said. "The no to being wrong." I waited. She looked at the book in my hands. Then at me. "Yes," she said. "Obviously yes." She took the book from my hands, which was somehow exactly right, the small gesture that contained everything, and I kissed her in the back of a used bookstore on a Tuesday afternoon, with no audience and no flourish, which is exactly how we both would have wanted it. Now, when people ask how we met, there's a version we tell and a version that's true, and they are roughly the same story. The version Claire tells is this: they paired him with the wrong woman at a singles mixer and he didn't notice. My version: they paired her with the wrong man and she let him stay anyway. We've never agreed on which one of us is right. We have agreed that this disagreement is not worth resolving. Henry's portrait watches us from the hallway. He would find all of this very satisfying. He was, as I said, the wisest of us. What would you have done if the card in your hand pointed you toward someone the whole room expected you to walk away from? And have you ever had the quiet courage to stop hedging, to stop protecting yourself from something that was already good? Tell me your story in the comments. If you like this one, leave a like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.